Welcome everybody to the A. Richard Newton series. We are thrilled to have, as you can see, lots of faces on the screen, but Prakash Janakiraman is our keynote speaker and Sumaya Raman will be moderating. We'll get to our introductions in just a moment as people start to gather. Just as some background, I'll go ahead and share my screen in case you don't already know or haven't already heard something about Prakash. So let me share the screen. And gosh, we're getting toward the end of our semester. It's nice to have everybody join. We are thrilled to have what I would consider two Cal Bears on the stage with us. Oh, that's not really true. We have, if you're looking at it, probably tons, like a handful of Cal Bears on the stage right now. So come on in. We'll start in just a few minutes. I want us to get up to about 200, and then I think we'll be a little higher than that today. Welcome, everyone. We usually have a little bit of music in the background, but we don't have that today. So everybody will have to have their own music on. Hope everybody is doing well. I know that Rishi and Pranati and Swetha had sent out two notes, two kind of next steps for everybody in the class. We are coming up toward the end of the semester and we are looking forward to seeing your reflections. I'd like to reiterate that I read everybody's reflections and we have a fairly large class this semester, a good group of synchronous watchers and a good group of asynchronous watchers. I look forward to hearing what you say. And if you could spend just a little extra time to make it more succinct, that would be greatly appreciated. I think Mark Twain once wrote, I would have written you a shorter letter, but I didn't have time to make it short. So something like that. I'm very liberally transcribing probably what he said. The other thing is we'd really appreciate your feedback for the class. We obviously look at your feedback every single class. But there's an evaluation form that went out and any thoughts you could share on the evaluation form would be greatly appreciated as well. Rishi, Swetha, Pranati, am I missing anything? Okay. Well, I know we have a lot to cover. Let me just check. I think somebody had a question. Thank you very much. It's not a question. You all are ever efficient in putting into the chat the evaluation form. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. It's my pleasure since the beginning of the semester. Aram has wanted to do this introduction. If you'll tell us just a wee bit about yourself, Aram, what you're studying, and then go into Prakash's introduction, that would be fantastic.
Cool, sounds good. Yeah, hey everybody, I'm Aram, and about a month ago, I got to speak with Prakash directly. Prakash approaches the world differently, and to follow someone like that, I thought an introduction that works differently would be better. So instead of focusing on Prakash's work background, I think Rishi already did a great job of that. I want to share a short story highlighting why I think he's such an amazing person. In the early 1990s, when Prakash was first wandering through the walkways of Berkeley as a student, he began taking his Intro to CS courses, much like a lot of us here. But soon after, he realized that there were so many other courses that he was more interested in taking. So he started taking those classes instead, classes like Sociology 30, the history of dinosaurs. I know, I want to take that. But it's this kind of independent thinking that's one of the key characteristics for who Prakash is. In fact, the dean of LNS called him in with just a semester to go, asking how in the world he was planning on finishing all these courses in literally one semester, and he didn't have an answer. But using that same mentality, Prakash did things differently. He left. To this day, he doesn't have a bachelor's degree. It's stories like these that again just highlight to me why he's such an amazing person and why I have such a high opinion of him, even after just a brief conversation. So if you want to learn more about him, definitely check out his Twitter. He's got a lot of really fun, awesome Warrior stuff out there. He's a huge Warriors fan, season ticket holder, went to so many games. And at the risk of upsetting his communications team, definitely check out his Medium, where his username, and I promise this is true, is proc_daddy. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce Prakash.
Thanks, Aram. Everything that he said is actually true, 100% true. My Medium handle is ProcDaddy, but I did move on Twitter to just Proc. So I'm a little more media friendly on that platform. But thank you so much for that introduction.
Fantastic. It's like having a rock star here. And because you are such a rock star, we have asked Sumaya Raman, who is also a data scientist star, to also be with you. Not only is Sumaya also a Cal grad, actually a Cal PhD, she has experience. She graduated also from Northeastern, a fantastic school, and she was working at Apple, Intuit, and is currently a data scientist at, if I would share my screen, currently a data scientist at Hyperscale. It'll be fun to hear you all talk a little bit with each other. Thank you both for joining, and I will go ahead and let you take it away. You know, I have some photos that I can share, so just let me know when you want me to bring those in, or I'll just go ahead and do that.
Sounds good. Thanks, Vicki. I'm really excited to talk to you, Prakash, and that was a very interesting introduction from Arun, so I think it's going to be quite the conversation that we have today. Probably what I want to know most is like, so when you were at UC Berkeley, you said, as we were chatting a little bit before we started, you said you came in undeclared and then you also left undeclared. And it sounds like you took a bunch of crazy courses during your time there. So if you could tell us a little bit about like how you made those decisions and what that story is, I think we'd all be interested.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's great, first off, to be back at Cal. Every opportunity I get to come back and talk to students, I take, because I think it's indicative of the experience that I had at Cal was really, really formative in my life. So what's interesting is if you go way back and think about why I even went to Cal, it's because my father started his journey in the United States at Cal. He immigrated to this country in 1967 on the backs of the civil rights movement that expanded immigration access to this country to non-Western European countries. And when he got here in 67, Cal was like peak Cal, right? Everything that Cal is known for, the civil rights movement and social justice and anti-war protests, all of that stuff was happening. And I remember as a young boy, he would tell me some stories about this. And I would ask him, I'd be like, Dad, it's crazy. That sounds like an incredible place. You know, were you out protesting and were you out, you know, participating in all this? And he was like, no, man, I was in the library or I was back at my dorm studying because I didn't want to get deported. But I had this almost mythological image of what it would be like to go to Berkeley. And so when the time came to choose where I would go to school, the choice was a little more obvious for my parents. You know, I grew up in Hayward, just 9 miles south of Oakland, and only a 20-minute BART ride from Cal. And so I think they had this vision that I would just stay home and commute to Berkeley. But instead, I managed to finagle my way into the dorms. I think there's some pictures of me in the dorms somewhere. But that being said, when I got there, I came in undeclared. I was 16 years old. I had skipped the second grade, started school early. So somehow I managed to be this young person starting my journey at Cal. And what I found was my parents, being traditional Indian immigrant parents, gave me one of three options in terms of careers to pursue. I could be a doctor, I could be a lawyer, I could be an engineer. Had to be one of those three things. And so not wanting to be overly committal on the front end of my journey, I came in undeclared. And I started taking computer science courses. And luckily my dad had given me a little bit of prep. Oh geez, here we go. That's the boy who would be king, I guess. But that was me at 16 years old in Ida Sproul Hall at Unit 3, my first dorm room. But you know, I didn't really know what I wanted to be when I grew up. And like many kids growing up in public schools that are underfunded, don't have great computer labs or facilities, and we didn't have one at my high school in Hayward. I really had only seen a pretty small, narrow range of possibilities for my life beyond being a doctor, lawyer, and engineer. And I didn't even really know what an engineer was. as I started to take computer science classes, I noticed two things right off the bat that I think are indicative of some of the problems that we're trying to solve today in industry and that are part of my job. One was, it was overwhelmingly male. So I came into a room and I saw a lot of dudes, frankly. And secondly, we were spending a lot of time on what I would call kind of laboratory activities, things that were, exploring the possibilities of math and computer science and the most abstract possibilities, but not in the most practical ways. And while I thought it was intellectually interesting, it didn't really nurture my soul in the way that I thought it was going to. And I started to drift into taking classes that I was just interested in. I took sociology classes. I took a class taught by a legendary professor named Dr. Harry Edwards called The Sociology of Sport, which explored things as interesting as improvisation and jazz and sports, his experience growing up in East St. Louis in a racially segregated community, really opening my eyes to the possibilities of life beyond just computer science. I took a class on dinosaurs, as Orem had mentioned. That was pretty cool. And over time, I had rounded out my experience at Cal with this technical education around math and computer science, but also all these humanities courses and all these courses about other interesting things. My South Asian heritage, I took South Asian studies. I took Tamil as a language, which was my family's ancestral language. And I became more of a rounded person coming out of Cal. That plus the appearing, the opportunity to meet people from different backgrounds and be on my own. But that's when inevitably my senior year, I had not declared a major, and the dean of the College of Letters and Sciences called me in, which for any of you who are in the College of LNS, that is always a bad thing. An unsolicited call from the dean is never a good thing. And I went in, and this austere man sitting across the desk, he thumbed through my transcript, probably just for dramatic effect. I'm sure he'd already reviewed it. And he looked across the table and he said, "Son, you know why I've called you here?" And I said, "No, not really." And he said, "Well, I'm looking through your transcript and it's unclear to me exactly what you're trying to achieve here at the university through the coursework that you've taken." And in that moment, I knew that I would either spend significantly more time at Berkeley pursuing the degree of choice, which would have been the computer science degree, or I would have to make a move. And so that's, Sumaya, how I came to the decision to ultimately leave school. But I left without a degree, but with a ton of experience, a great network, a foundation of both technical and humanities education that I think serves me well today in a world where, number one, the platform we're building at NextDoor is about connecting communities, a problem that has become even more apparent in a world that's more divided, polarized. People are isolated, kindness is at an all-time low. And it's all because the social infrastructure of our communities is eroded. So I think on the one hand, a lot of the things that I learned at Cal are directly applicable. But then on the other hand, I'm trying to solve issues around diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And coming out of Berkeley, a place that I felt a real sense of belonging, and I felt a community of folks where I didn't have to look very far, and especially growing up in Hayward, to see a face that didn't look like mine, or to hear a voice or an accent that didn't sound like mine, or a way of talking that didn't sound like mine, or hear a perspective that didn't match my own lived experience. I took for granted this idea of community and diversity. But then when I dropped out of Cal and joined my first Silicon Valley startup, I really did feel like a fish out of water. I felt like I didn't belong. I felt like I wasn't hearing the cultural connectivity or seeing the cultural connectivity that I'd come to appreciate. So that was my early experience. I think Orem mentioned I spent a lot of time playing basketball at Cal. I did, probably more than I was in the classroom. I probably spent a lot of time on Sproul, just sitting around and enjoying lunch and watching people walk by, and learning more about kind of what it meant to be on my own and grow into my own skin. So my experience at Cal was formative. It wasn't all about the education. A lot of it was about hooping and playing video games and hanging out with my friends and trying to meet women and whatever else young kids do at university. But as I think back, I have a tremendous amount of pride of those days and a tremendous amount of pride to be associated with Cal even without the degree.
That's an awesome story. And I really like what you said about kind of that drastic shift when you left college, going from such a strong sense of community and then just out in the world. I think that's like a common theme that a lot of college students feel. So when you started that first job and were leaving that college community, what sort of things did you do to like try to stay connected? And what was even this phase like kind of the seeding of NextDoor when you were realizing like how important community is?
Yeah, there was a couple of things that I immediately observed about the industry as I entered. And I would say that my decision to drop out of school was not a particularly thoughtful one. So for anyone on this call that's thinking, hey, maybe I'll drop out of school, just like give it some thought. Like there's a lot of benefit to staying in school, finishing that degree, getting credentialed, even in a world where that is starting to change a little bit. But for me, it was not a particularly well thought out plan. I happened to find, and I'm going to date myself a little bit. This is back in 1996. The first job that I actually found in the classified listing section of a newspaper, a physical newspaper. And I remember I joined that job as a temp, and it was at a startup, a fast growing startup called Excite at Home. It was a precursor to, there's the timeline back in 96, 97. It was a precursor to the Google era, right? When search was becoming a big opportunity on an internet that originally was an academic medium that was now turning into something that was used by consumers at scale. And so I realized very quickly that while I was in the building and doing just basic data entry work, it wasn't really that interesting in terms of work, that the skills that I had learned around computer science and programming were immediately applicable and differentiated me from the folks that I was working with. So in doing these data entry jobs, what we were doing was we were categorizing all of the different sites on the web into a taxonomy or a directory of services, because that was the thing that people did back then. It was less about search and more about this directory experience. And I realized very quickly that I could automate that process. I could write scripts that would go out and slurp up different web URLs, get their titles and descriptions, and do the work that I was doing manually. And all of a sudden, if you were to look at a productivity chart of like the 15 people that I worked with, and there were people who were doing, 100 websites a day, I was doing like 10,000, and I was off the charts productive. And that's what kind of led me into my career as a software engineer, was someone was like, what the hell is going on? What is this kid doing? And they recognized that I had some innate talent for programming and some skills for programming. So that was one of the ways that I started my career in software engineering. But the second thing that I observed almost immediately was that the founders of this company were only 3 or 4 years older than me. They were all recent Stanford grads. They didn't have any credentialing that was any different than me. They didn't have a ton of work experience. They just stumbled upon a good idea. They started to build it out, and they were able to create a company out of it that at the time maybe had 100 or 150 employees. And I recognized that the culture in Silicon Valley, despite feeling a little bit of dissonance around the music I liked, or the way that I spoke, or the slang that I used, or my particular nuances of my upbringing and lived experience, I also found that there was a lot that I really enjoyed. It was a casual culture. It was one where good ideas can come from anywhere. It was one where the ideas of egalitarianism and sharing information freely, and people not being in this like cutthroat, terribly, terrible culture, the kind that you see sometimes when you see things about Wall Street and investment banking and some of these other cultures that are a little bit more cutthroat, that a lot of my friends coming out of Cal were in. I found that was different and really appealed to me. So that's where I started to feel a sense of belonging and started to see, hey, maybe this is something that's somewhere downstream. When I build confidence in my skills and experience, maybe someday I might want to start a company. And all the while, I was trying to build a network, trying to make a name for myself at the office by doing good work, starting to be recognized for some of my contributions to the company, but really maintaining that tight circle of friends that I had at Berkeley that helped me feel like my authentic self and helped me, kind of stay grounded in who I was. But that was my early experience. And that early experience was really formative for two other reasons. Number one, the general manager of our division was a guy named David Z. David Z is now a partner at a firm called Greylock Partners and is on the board of directors of my company, of NextDoor, and a major investor in our company. So that was a way that the network came to bear. And the second is that so many people of that vintage at that company also went on to start new companies. There were people or started as early employees in companies that we've all now heard of, like Facebook and Google and others. So it was really a transformative experience for me to work at a company that ultimately grew to a $7.5 billion acquisition back in 2000 before I left. And it was just a rocket ship. And for a kid that didn't have much direction, didn't have a major, didn't really know where I was going, being in that company, being in a place that prioritized my own learning and development, was a fast growing company that kept pushing me into positions of more and more responsibility, even when I didn't feel like I was patently qualified to do those jobs. It was an explosive period of growth for me in personal development. So, it worked out, but again, I wouldn't recommend to anybody drop out of school without a plan. So.
Yeah, your job at Excite sounds amazing. What I'm wondering is like, how did you decide to go there? Did you have like multiple options and you kind of saw like the amazing opportunity in this, or was it mainly just luck that you ended up getting to be a part of something so cool?
No, it was just dumb luck. It really was dumb luck. It was that ad in the classified listings section. It was that they took a chance on a kid like me. They recognized that in that temporary responsibility, the hourly, I was making $10 an hour in that first job. And, I had no idea of how things like stock options and equity and compensation in tech companies work. I didn't know any of that stuff. But I took that job and, I started to learn very, very quickly. I knew that I had a high aptitude for learning and I could learn quickly. And again, I had the technical background as well. And when I found the intersection of opportunity between, oftentimes in management, we think of, how can we make our employees successful? And it's one way to think about it is 3 overlapping circles. It's like a Venn diagram of 3 circles. The first circle is what's important to the company. And it's the company's responsibility and leadership's responsibility to continually message out to the company, hey, here are our priorities. Here are the things that we think are important to our success. So that's one circle. Circle number 2 is what are you good at? And that's where your manager and you have a conversation and your manager holds a mirror to you and gives you feedback about the things that you're good at and the things that you could be better at and areas for growth and development. So I had some great mentors and managers. And then the third is really about you. What are you interested in? What are the things that wake you up in the morning? What are you intrinsically motivated about? And when I found that intersection of things in that company, that's when my career really changed trajectory. And again, it's the company was doing well. I had great managers and mentors, people like David and others. And then I had enough drive and passion and ambition that after I would get home from work, I would go read books and I would learn the things that I didn't know. I would fill in the gaps. And, that was really my formative education beyond Cal as well.
Awesome. And I guess, at Excite, you were an individual contributor, and I think maybe your first management role was at ePinions. From going to an individual to contributor to manager, you start to become the one that influences the culture, mentoring others. Like, what was that transition like? And is there anything that you found especially challenging about it?
Yeah, it's actually a very interesting journey because I was pushed into management like so many individual contributors are. I think in Silicon Valley companies, there's this kind of separation of duties between the people who are makers and the people who are managers. And there's a thing called a maker's schedule and a manager's schedule. And a manager's schedule typically is you go into meetings and you talk about the work, and it's kind of this meta layer above work. And the makers are the ones that are in the trenches. They're actually building things, they're writing code, they're doing all the fun and cool stuff for which they're recognized. And so especially in cultures like Google and even at Excite, this idea of the manager was sort of a thankless job. The folks that were really respected in the company tended to be the folks that were really high up in on the IC stack. But as companies grow and grow and grow, obviously at a leadership level, leaders are observing, hey, what's going on within the individual contributor ranks? Who are the folks who have influence? Who are the folks who have the natural leadership charisma or the ability to make strong decisions, the ability to influence others, and who we can put into places where they can be great mentors and leaders. And a boss of mine at ePinions recognized that innate quality in me pretty early and pushed me to kind of, flex that muscle a little bit and to give me the support and the development and training that I needed in order to be a good manager. And I took to it pretty quickly. initially kind of playing a hybrid role between a maker and a manager. One of the biggest challenges for me, though, was feeling comfortable in a world where I was always one of many peers, and moving into a position where now I had some authority and influence over other people's careers, and having to have difficult conversations about performance management and feedback and compensation and all of these kind of awkward conversations where someone who I viewed as a peer was now reporting into me, and there was a different power structure. And luckily, the way that I was able to navigate some of that, and the way that I think about management today, is it's really about servant leadership. It's about getting to know the people on your team, really understanding who they are as individuals, understanding what makes them each unique, what motivates them, what environment they need to do their best work, what kinds of information they need, being there to move obstacles away and clear the path for them through clear prioritization, really giving them information about what's important to the company and how their work aligns to that, and then helping them with whatever resources they need. And I again had really great mentors along the way, a ton of great mentors who encouraged me and coached me and allowed me to fail and make some mistakes without that being a fatal flaw in my path. But I would say the two hardest things are, number one, going from a peer relationship to that leadership relationship and navigating that cleanly. And number two is just finding your own voice as a leader and really starting to feel comfortable in making decisions, in being an arbiter of difficult decisions that maybe are split down the middle. In many cases, that's when things escalate up through the management chain or leadership chain, and starting to be good at making frameworks around how we could make decisions that weren't necessarily cult of personality decisions. You very rarely want to be in a situation where someone goes, well, let's just do whatever Prakash says, or what would Prakash think? That's a cult of personality decision. What you want to do is form a collective identity around a set of principles and values that people can share, and then a set of frameworks through which you view those principles and values and make decisions. And so those were things that over time I came to learn. I was probably more of a cult of personality leader to begin with. But today, I view my job as a leader to really make myself extinct, not be the bottleneck for decisions, not have to be the arbiter for those decisions, to think about the ways that I make decisions and turn them back into principles and values that we can share out to the company. But that was how my journey began in management.
Yeah, it sounds like you've learned a lot of lessons throughout all these different places you worked at, both as an individual contributor and then a manager. And then you started your own company, Fanbase. I think that was the first one. So how did that come about, and what made you start a company?
Yeah, I'd always had dreams of starting a company, and I never had any particularly good ideas. Fanbase counts amongst those. That was not a particularly good idea because it ultimately failed. But I always wanted to do it. And I think I lacked two things: experience and confidence. And so I wanted to, on the heels of shopping.com, which I thought was a really good and formative experience for me in growing as a leader, being part of a company that went through the process of going through being public and doing an IPO and growing. I got to see a lot of the inner workings of how a company worked beyond just my own functional area of responsibility. That is to say, I'd always viewed the world through the eyes of my own engineering roles. So I knew how to be a good engineer. I knew how to build products. I knew everything about the day-to-day of that, but I hadn't learned that much about what makes a company whole. What does a CEO do? What does a marketing team do? How do you sell products? How do you think about go-to-market strategies? How do you support products? How do you price them? And so the shopping.com experience was one that really gave me more visibility into how all of that worked. And along the way, I had the opportunity to develop some great relationships with a guy who was the CEO of that company and became COO through the merger, a guy named Nirav Tolia, and then who became one of my co-founders, and another woman named Sarah Leary, who was my other co-founder, who was the head of marketing and product at shopping.com. And when you go through a process of building a company from, I think it was 20 something people when I joined ePinions, which later merged into the company that became shopping.com, to a company of several hundred people that went public and had revenues of tens of millions of dollars, you just see a lot, right? You see a lot of the struggle, you see a lot of the success, but you also see all of the toil along the way. And to be in the room for some of those decisions, to go through, to be in the bunker with folks in leadership, you learn a lot about them, and you start to develop these really trusting relationships. And so the relationship building around who I would start a company with really began at shopping.com. But there was still a little bit of a confidence gap about my own ability to build and lead my own engineering team. I just hadn't done that yet. And what I wanted to do was really confirm, hey man, are you good enough to do this? Are you strong enough an engineer? Can you really hang with people who are solving these kinds of problems at scale? And do you have the confidence in your own leadership and voice? And that's ultimately why I went to Google, because at that time I had no interest in working for a larger company. And to think that I thought Google was a large company then when it was maybe 1,000 people, and now it's like hundreds of thousands of people, it's pretty funny. But I joined Google really as a litmus test for myself to see, in a place that characterized their success around engineering excellence, being able to attract the best and brightest minds in Silicon Valley to solve some of the hardest problems in computer science. Could I be part of that culture? Would I fit in? Could I hang in a place like that? Could I be a leader in a place like that, where you're trying to coach and mentor and lead some of the strongest engineers in the world? And that experience was just incredible, because there are so few companies with the ambition of a company like Google. By the time I had left, projects I had worked on, like Google Maps, had innovated in ways that our industry has never seen before. So we had created new things like Street View on Google Maps, where we were driving around cars rigged with cameras connected to computers that were drawing, creating these incredibly immersive maps experiences. We were flying satellites and low flight planes to do ortho photography of different areas and satellite imagery of different areas. We were driving our own cars to get a sense of the road networks and speed. We were innovating on maps in terms of driving directions. We had acquired Waze. There were so many incredible things that were happening during that time that, it just blew my mind that a group of committed people with the right technical skills, but more importantly, the right ambition and support from management could do. So that really welled me up with the confidence to say, gosh, if I could do some of this kind of stuff, and if people really, if I had the technical skills and the leadership skills, well, shoot, I could probably go start a company. So it was about two things for me: confidence and partnership. And the last thing I'll say is that, in starting the company and starting Fanbase, the partnership opportunity was really unique, because Nirav had previous experience as a founder, which I didn't have. He'd had previous experience raising money, building a company, founding and incorporating a company. Sarah had really great experience bringing a first-time product to market and understanding how to get customer feedback and how to position and brand a product. And those were all things that were non-overlapping to my sweet spot, which was how to build things and how to create good engineering and how to hire great engineers. And so that combination and partnership in total, I think, was a great one for a founding team. And that's the reason that I ultimately left Google, was to go have that experience of starting a company with people who were experienced. I knew I wasn't going to be eating top ramen and working out of my read we'd be able to go raise some money and do this the right way. I knew I was going to be able to learn from Nirav and Sarah, who were more experienced and seasoned executives than I, and that we were going to have a great opportunity to build something that hopefully would have some impact. So that was my entrepreneurship story.
Awesome. And then it seems like you eventually pivoted away from Fanbase and started NextDoor. So yeah, what was the story behind that, and how do you make that decision? Was it a tough decision? Did all your co-founders agree, or how did that go?
Yeah, on the one hand, it was a very easy decision to pivot away, because we knew very clearly what we had built wasn't working. With Fanbase, we had set out to build a resource that was very similar to something like IMDb is for movies, a community-generated almanac of information about everybody who'd played high school, college, and professional sports. It was a way to commemorate our own athletic achievements and the everyday life. So if you were a Division III field hockey player at a small school in Ohio, you would have a page the same way that someone like LeBron James or Steph Curry might have a page on Fanbase. And ultimately what we found was that was not a very good idea. It didn't deliver a lot of value. Even those people who were commemorating their athletic identities didn't actually care that much about it. And so the idea that we would stop working on it, just all the data supported us not working on it. The harder part was coming back to the team. And mind you, these are people who we recruited to a vision that I was out selling, a dream and an ambition that caused them to leave their really comfortable, high-paying jobs where they had clout and status, to come take a risk and take a chance on us. And not just on this idea, but us as leaders. And it's a process that doesn't feel good to say, hey, that bill of goods that I sold you, it actually didn't come to pass. That dream that I sold you, it didn't come to pass. So at the time, our team was about 14 people. We had about $8.5 or $9 million left in the bank. And we went to the team and we said, hey, listen, what we're working on isn't working. And it's unlikely that we're going to pivot into something within sports. So we're likely going to do a wholesale reset. This represents a crossroads for us. You have the opportunity to either leave and part ways as friends, and we will support you in that. We'll pay you a severance, in fact, which is very unusual when a company is going through distress like that. We'll pay you a generous severance and we'll help you find new jobs. Or you can stay and really see how the sausage is made and start at the ground up and see what the real experience of entrepreneurship is and be a co-founder in our next entity. And about half the company left. And those who remained are the ones in this picture that you see on the right side. That's the original 7 of us who were part of the founding team of what became NextDoor. And it was that tight-knit group that sat every single day in an empty, conference room, empty whiteboards all around, trying to figure out what our next idea would be. And it turns out that we wanted to take a different approach than we had with Fanbase. With Fanbase, we had a vision for what we wanted to build. We articulated that vision, and then we took a year to build towards that vision and deliver something to market. And ultimately what we delivered, with all that expensive time and energy, just kind of fell flat. And so we decided, you know what, we're going to do things a little differently this time. We're going to go out and we're going to get market feedback. We're going to try and do things as cheaply as possible, experiment as cheaply as possible. So we sent out surveys to all of our friends and family asking, hey, how many of your neighbors do you know? Do you wish you knew more of them? What would you use your neighbors for if you could access them? How do you get access to this kind of information and that kind of local information? And that gave us a lot of insight into what might land with neighbors. We started in one neighborhood in Menlo Park over by that other university, down the road in Palo Alto. We started over there. We iterated quickly. We built a really rough and dirty prototype within a couple of weeks that we then landed there. And using the feedback that we got from that community, we started to mature and mature and mature until we felt like we had found a place where we had some product market fit. And then we went one neighborhood at a time, calling our friends and family, begging them to use this thing. And with each new neighborhood, we got new types of feedback that we incorporated into the product. And so ultimately, and that's a picture of one of our early investors and also an early neighborhood lead in his own neighborhood. That's Ashton Kutcher from that 70s show. He was a neighborhood lead in his community in the Hollywood Hills. But we started to form an identity around this product. We started to then formulate a broader vision and more conviction that this was the idea out of a whole range of ideas that were, kind of left on the cutting room floor. And that was the idea we wanted to pursue. And so we had really supportive investors at that time. We had some inspiration through research and insight that we were able to glean from not just from the market, but also academics. And that's what fueled us on our journey to build NextDoor.
Awesome. And that's exciting to know that the first neighborhood was Menlo Park, because that's actually where I live now. And I recently—
Oh, there you go. Okay.
I'm excited that it's the first one.
Yeah.
So it's been a while since you first originally launched NextDoor, and I'm sure there have been a ton of changes since then. Has anything surprised you about the way things turned out with NextDoor? Anything that you didn't imagine originally that's there now?
Yeah, I would say if you had told Prakash in 2010 when we started this company that it would take this long for a company like ours to kind of get to some meaningful amount of scale, I would have been surprised. Because here's the thing, when we started the company, we were inspired by a Pew Research Institute study that had come out just a few weeks earlier that summer. And it said that 29% of Americans know only some of their neighbors, which implies few. 28% of Americans don't know a single neighbor by name. And so the biggest thing when you're building these consumer internet properties is you think about distribution. How do you get the word out? How do people discover your products? How do you grow your products? And usually distribution comes in one of two ways. One, you go out and market them and you have some mass marketing campaign and people see the appeal of the product, they try it out, and then what do? They go tell their friends, right? And then the other is you find some way to address a market need that you can create some distribution through something like Google or SEO or search. But usually it's like organic word of mouth and viral growth or some other mechanism that resembles marketing. For us, we knew that there would not be that viral mechanism because most people didn't know their neighbors. They didn't have electronic correspondence with them. You know, if I were to poll the 200 people or so on this call and ask them how many of your neighbors know, I think it would be probably representative of the broader kind of American demographic. That's because community in this country has been on a precipitous decline for the past, several generations as we've become more mobile, more isolated, more disconnected from the real world. So I would have thought it would have been easier to get people to join a product like this, but as it turns out, it's really hard. You have to build brick by brick by brick by brick. And so that speaks to our journey of having to do things more unscalably than I was used to, certainly at a place like Google, where they ingrain in your head on day one, plan for your product to have millions and millions of people using it. Well, for us, we needed to think about non-scalable approaches to getting market feedback and going and sitting on couches in people's neighborhoods, in their living rooms, talking to their homeowners boards and getting feedback, and then really grinding to get people to sign up and join the service. Thinking about new ways to get the word out about the product, thinking about ways to tamp down things like incivility between neighbors who are fighting about local issues. And, all of that was really, really difficult for us. But the things that have surprised me on the positive side are how impactful being connected to your neighbors can be. We knew from the research that was pioneered by someone named Dr. Robert Putnam, who used to be the head of the sociology department at Harvard. He wrote this seminal work called Bowling Alone, which addresses community in the United States and this free fall and this precipitous decline in community and some of the causes for that. Well, what he concludes is that in communities that are higher in social capital, social capital is just a measure of how many people you know in your community, and you can ask for favors and help reciprocally. In communities that are higher in social capital, normalized by demographic, socioeconomic status, outcomes across the board get better. Crime rates fall, property values increase, education and test outcomes get better, and people in fact live longer in communities where you know your neighbors and you have the help and support of your neighbors. And research that we commissioned shows that knowing as few as 6 of your neighbors greatly reduces your risk of depression due to loneliness. So there's a lot of benefit to that, and we actually see it bear out on the platform. So in a situation like COVID, where we go into this global pandemic, the world shrinks out from under us. We're spending more time in our homes and in our local communities than ever before. Almost overnight last March, we saw an 80% surge in usage on NextDoor of daily active users. And that speaks to, I think, the absence of local community in most of our lives and how important it is when you need it there. Floods, fires, hurricanes, all this crazy stuff that we've seen, that's when neighbors need to band together. And if you don't know your neighbors, you don't have their support. So I would say I am incredibly surprised and really warmed by the fact that our platform is connecting people in ways that could ultimately, like if another Pew Research study comes out in 5 years, asking how many of your neighbors you know, and those numbers get better. And if Dr. Putnam's research holds true that knowing more of your neighbors actually leads to better outcomes, then I want to be able to go out and prove empirically that there's a through line between the work that we do to connect neighbors on our platform and better outcomes in society as a consequence of it. So that's what keeps me coming to work every day. And every gray hair in this beard was earned on this job. You saw the picture at the beginning, but I didn't have any of those things when we started Fanbase, but like here they are. But that's kind of why we do the work. So I am very, very surprised, but also very, very pleased to see that work is having a consequence in the real world.
Got it. And it sounds like you actually have 2 roles at NextDoor. In addition to heading up engineering, you're also the diversity, inclusion, and belonging officer. So what made you take on that additional role, and what does diversity mean to you?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's a very unusual circumstance to be where you're the head of technology, but you're also the head of diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And so The reason that I did this was twofold. Number one, for us to achieve our purpose and mission, and NextDoor's purpose, as stated, is to cultivate a kinder world where everyone has a neighborhood they can rely on. And the key word there is everyone. For us to be successful in our work, we need to build communities that represent the diversity that they see in the real world. And to build products that understand how to access into that diversity, we need to build a company that represents the communities, the diversity of communities that we serve. And so I felt like I had some unique lived experience growing up in Hayward, which, very recently was ranked the third most diverse city in the country based on ethno-racial composition and linguistic diversity. So, again, I took very much for granted that I was growing up in a diverse environment. I had the experience of feeling a sense of belonging in my community and knowing what the opportunity was for community. And then I also had the moral authority in the company and the moral standing as a founder to move and shift priorities and resources and to really get leadership bought in at the highest level in the C-suite. And it wasn't a tough sell for us because ultimately for us to achieve that purpose and mission, we needed these things to converge. And so that's why I said, you know what, I'm going to vacate my responsibilities as the operational head of engineering and running the entire engineering organization. We have an incredible new leader who's running engineering now. His name is Antonio Silveira, who grew up in Brazil, and he's fantastic and he's doing a great job there. I now think about our technology strategy moving forward, and that affords me the time now to shift my attention into building community inside of our company. We call it diversity, inclusion, and belonging. Many other companies call it diversity, equity, and inclusion and other names. But when we think about the priorities, and here's what I think about the role and the importance of it, it starts with belonging. Can our employee base show up every day to work as their authentic selves? Do they feel a connection to our purpose and mission? Do they have confidence in leadership? Do they feel like they can offer their own opinions without fear of retribution? Do they feel psychologically safe in the workplace? How do those numbers shake out as we look at them across different demographic segments? Do our Black employees feel as good about it as our Latino employees, as our LGBTQ plus employees, as women in the company? Do people feel like our practices are fair in terms of pay and promotion? And all of these things then lead to what you identify as your culture. And if your culture is strong around diversity, around belonging and inclusion, then you can hope to build a more diverse culture. You can hope to attract the widest possible segment of the population to work at your company or to be on your platform. And so, that's why I'm doing the work. I wake up every morning. Today, for example, we all saw probably the Derek Chauvin verdict come out. The anxieties and tensions that happen in the real world because our platform intersects with the cultural zeitgeist are likely to spill over into our platform. So what can I do and what can our team do to make sure that our Black neighbors are feeling safe and welcome on the platform? We've had a spate of anti-Asian American and Pacific Islander violence going on. I think we've all seen that. What can we do to make sure that our neighbors from the Asian American and Pacific Islander community feel seen and feel a sense of belonging in their communities? And so all of these things are things that I wake up every day thinking about. I go to sleep thinking about, sometimes with great anxiety and paranoia, but ultimately we feel like we need to do a better job here. And that's why I took on the responsibility.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I really like how you started with belonging and then only can go to diversity, because I feel like a lot of other companies approach it the opposite way, try to attract diverse talent and then, adjust the culture to keep them there. But it sounds like you're taking the opposite approach and making sure you're starting with that culture that would be accepting of everyone. And not just accepting, but really, yeah, like you said, belonging, I think is the best word.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think now, Vicky, is it time to switch over to Q&A?
Yeah, we have questions lined up. Prakash, I always think Sumaya is an incredible speaker, but my gosh, I don't know if you want to get some water, but you can just keep going. It's amazing.
There we go. I will have some water. Thank you, Vicky.
Of course. We have some great questions lined up and we'll go ahead and bring the students in for that. Sumaya, thank you very, very much. Please stay around.
Thank you, Sumaya.
Yeah, it was a pleasure talking to you, Prakash.
And then I am going to ask for Faria, if you would also start your video and come on in and ask your question, and I'll go ahead and add spotlight for you. Faria, you're on.
Hello.
Hi, Faria.
So my question was, how has NextDoor dealt with its reputation of being unwelcoming to Black users and the racial profiling on the platform due to neighborhoods being set up as like self-governing systems? And is NextDoor considering requiring a sort of racial training for community moderators instead of just allowing like whoever sets up the community platform to automatically be a moderator?
Yeah, it's a great question. So our journey on this began back in 2015 when we first started to see reports of racial profiling happening on the platform. So the way that we think about this is it comes back to purpose and mission. If the company is going to be successful, if neighborhoods are going to represent the diversity of people who live in them, then people have to feel welcome. So the first thing that we did was we went out and we partnered with folks in the community, including community organizations like the 100 Black Men of Oakland, Neighbors for Racial Justice, the Oakland City Council, and we convened roundtable discussions where we could get feedback firsthand, even feedback that was antagonistic towards the company. I always feel like part of my job is to go out and hear the most vociferous feedback, the people who are having the worst experience on the platform, so that we could feed that back in to our product development process and our goals. The second thing that we did was we partnered with academics. So again, unfortunately, at that other school down in Palo Alto, there's an incredibly fantastic research team led by Dr. Jennifer Eberhardt. Dr. Eberhardt is one of the world's leading authorities on bias. And she wrote a book called Biased, which if you're interested in this space, I would recommend, highly recommend reading. But Jennifer Eberhardt and her team partnered with us on some research and some exploration of ways that we could change our product to do what she calls one of the best interventions to combating bias, which is just slowing people down, right? Oftentimes we find ourselves in our reptilian brain, right? The amygdala in the back where you're just a fight or flight response. And that's when you're in your worst decision-making behavior. That's when you say things that you wish you didn't say. And if you could just slow yourself down and get yourself in the frontal cortex where rational thought happens, then that can actually help you. So in our crime and safety flow, we actually change the product, which in Silicon Valley, like people don't do this, right? You introduce friction into product experiences, that's considered a bad thing. But we inserted friction into the crime and safety flow with the feedback of those community organizations to say, hey, you can no longer just post a message saying suspicious dark-skinned person walking through the community. Because number one, that's not that suspicious. Number two, that's not a crime in progress. Number three, it's just surveillance and racial profiling. So you have to describe the suspicious activity, not the person, but the activity that draws suspicion. If someone's breaking into a car window or climbing over a fence or abducting a child, well, yeah, that's a cause for concern. And then you need to list multiple attributes, not just race, but multiple attributes of the perpetrator of that. And that actually reduced the incidence of racial profiling, that intervention and that slowing down of people by 75%. So it was a combination of community feedback, academic research, product changes that led to that reduction. The second thing that we did was we started to build upon that research, and we built new features, including something called the kindness reminder, which we have a community moderated system, as you call out. We actually believe in that because we believe that tech companies in general have a lot of power these days, and centralizing that power and authority even further seems to me to be a bad idea. So we're trying to decentralize power and authority to the communities and help them become better at self-governing by setting a set of guardrails around our community guidelines and empowering people in the communities themselves to moderate the activity. Now, you're right, when we originally started the product, the people who were the first folks to start those neighborhoods ultimately took on responsibility for not just welcoming new neighbors or inviting new neighbors, but ultimately as those neighborhoods came to scale, moderating the activity. And that wasn't a job that they necessarily wanted to have or felt empowered to have. So what we've done over the past 6 months is we've actually divested that responsibility into multiple roles so that we democratize access to leadership in the communities. We provide more ways for different people to participate in community leadership. And we've actually gone out and recruited nearly 100,000 new people that we call community reviewers who have the responsibility specifically around moderation of activity in the communities. In so doing, that has built a more diverse set of representative community moderators, and we can do a lot more there. And then the last part of your question was, do we do anything to train these moderators and help them understand the context in which they operate? So number one, coming back to something I said earlier, we know that our company lives inside of the cultural zeitgeist. So anything that happens in the real world, those tensions and anxieties are necessarily going to spill over into our platform. So we know we're in for a long road of whatever happens, whether it's the insurgents at the Capitol, whether it's the continued killing of unarmed Black men by police, whether it's issues related to social justice and equity and fairness. We know that these are things that our communities are dealing with every single day. And so we have to be prepared to make NextDoor a space where that kind of discourse can happen, but in a civil and productive way. And so that's a combination of policy, training. And so we partnered with a woman named Christina Blackern, who runs an organization called The New Quo. And we developed a custom and bespoke anti-racism training that we think is going to be one of the largest rollouts of anti-racism training in history, probably. We're doing this to hundreds of thousands of our community moderators and making it available to them. And so that's something that's in progress right now. And the goal is to lift the collective consciousness of the people who are empowered in this way on our platform, to give them some perspective and context around the lived experience of people who may be different than them. And to not antagonize them by saying, you are racist and you're terrible people and you need to do this, but to say, like, have empathy for your fellow human beings, because they're your neighbors first. They're people with whom you share space and resources, and your kids go to school with these people. And you need to make sure that everyone in the community feels safe and welcome. So how can we bring people along for that ride in a way that aligns to our purpose and mission and values that we want to really strongly embed into the product and into the culture and into the company, but also into the power structure that in fact enforces those guidelines on the platform. So we're doing a ton of work. This is what I wake up every day thinking about. This is what I go to sleep every day thinking about. That's why diversity, inclusion, and belonging is really important at the company. Last thing I'll say is that we've also included and incorporated more diverse perspectives around the company. So we've added to our board of directors, which is the highest level of governance. Those are the bosses to our CEO. We've added a gentleman named John Hope Bryant, who runs the largest financial literacy organization serving underserved communities in this country, Operation Hope. He grew up in Compton, California, African-American, lives in Atlanta, Georgia. And then a woman named Andrea Wisham, who for 20 years was Oprah's lead producer and storyteller for the Oprah Winfrey Show, and now works with Melody Hobson and George Lucas on Skywalker Ventures. And she's just this incredible, incredible person, also a Cal alumni. So Andrea is a little bit older than me at Cal, but also went to Cal. And so again, diverse perspectives at the highest level of governance of the company, and then advisory boards that include people like Derek Johnson, who's the president and CEO of the NAACP. Tracy Mears, who leads the Justice Collaboratory over at Yale University, was part of Barack Obama's 21st Century Policing Task Force. Jennifer Eberhard, who we talked about. These are all diverse perspectives that we're bringing around the table. And we're spending time on research and insights inside of communities of color to get their firsthand feedback. So there's a lot of work being done, but it's a great question, Faria. I think it's something that I take very, very seriously given my own community. And we're doing that not just for our Black members, but also for Asian American members, Latino members who live along border towns where immigration and ICE raids and all kinds of crazy stuff is happening, and our international members who are struggling with different issues in local markets.
Thank you so much. And I also commend NextDoor for removing the report to police function. That was huge. And it's great to hear the work you're doing, because a lot of tech companies are very performative in their activism. So it's nice to see NextDoor taking the proper steps. Sorry. Thank you.
Yeah, check out it. Just recently, we just enacted some new policy decisions that I think are quite maybe controversial or provocative, but we're the first tech platform to outlaw the words white lives matter on the platform, because that is definitely a signal of white supremacy. We've also put guidance around use of all lives matter or blue lives matter. In particular, those phrases are not allowed to be used on NextDoor when used to undermine the Black Lives Matter movement or movements for social justice and racial equity, because that aligns to our corporate values and what we believe as a company. And again, it's not called to personality. It's not because Prakash said that we need to do that. even though I agree very strongly in those principles and in social justice and racial equity. It's what I do. It's what I'd be doing if I wasn't starting this company or working on this company. But it's because that's what we think makes for welcoming neighborhoods and for people to feel a sense of belonging in their neighborhoods. So, you know, you will likely see continued push on us to do more. I welcome that. I welcome the opportunity to talk with any social justice organizations, anybody that's advocating for communities that are on the margin or underserved. I want to hear from them. And you'll continue to see us do more. So thank you for that question. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you for answering it so well.
You bet.
Maria, thanks for having the courage to ask that. And maybe those are your colleagues going, yes, way to go on the phone there. We have about 5 or 6 questions that we're going to take. And while Amrita is getting on, I think to ask her question. Amrita, I think you're coming on.
Yeah, I'm here.
We hear you. I just don't quite see you yet, but I will in a minute. But while you're coming on, I'm actually also going to post a poll for everybody. I am curious to know how many of you all are using NextDoor. I know that I use it, and certainly in my age group, everybody uses it, but I'm going to post it and see what you all think. And Amrita, go ahead and ask your question.
Hi. So I have a 2-part question. So the first part is, I'm really curious as to why you decided to start in Menlo Park. I've lived here my entire life, and it's not a particularly ethnically diverse or socioeconomically diverse town. And so I'm curious as to how starting in a town that was pretty homogenous, pretty small, pretty secluded compared to the average American town, how that's affected the platform from launching out from there. And then based off that, and then my second part is, what do you think about how sometimes people in NextDoor can say things that they wouldn't say in person, and how if we're trying to replicate real neighbor conversations, people don't always behave in a way that they would in real life?
Yeah, it's a great question. So why do we start in Menlo Park? So early days of starting a company, one of the things that you're trying to do, the only thing that really matters is trying to find product market fit. And trying to find product market fit involves a number, it's like multivariate calculus. There's a bunch of different inputs into what might make for a good community to start in. It's also largely determined by a community's willingness to try a new product like ours. So it turns out that it was through a personal connection. A good friend of mine was the HOA president of a small community, a 90 household community in Menlo Park called Lorelei. But still, there's a sign in front of Lorelei that says that it was the very first NextDoor neighborhood in the entire country. And so number one, it was accessible to us. It was a place where we could iterate and get feedback quickly because it was trusted, that connection. It was a place where we could fail potentially and not leave a lot of wake from that failure. And it was also a community that they had some existing connectivity, and they were using products like a WordPress blog. I think they had a Yahoo group as well. So they weren't starting from a place of nothing. They were looking for an improved solution. And so a lot of it kind of factored into the fact that we had a friendly introduction. We had a community that had, some opportunity for us to succeed. We weren't coming into a completely blue ocean type of situation, but a place where there was some appreciation for community and some appreciation for what a technology platform could do, and a willingness to work with us and iterate and develop new features. So that's ultimately why we started in Menlo Park. As we radiated out from Menlo Park into new communities, we continued to build on our friends and family network because we didn't have a lot of marketing muscle. We had no brand recognition. We didn't have a mature product that we felt very comfortable bringing to scale. And so we continued to use our networks to build that. And in those early communities, we started to diversify pretty early on. It wasn't long before we were in communities in parts of Tennessee, parts of the South, communities in which our friends and family didn't actually live. And so we started to see more urban penetration. We started to see more diversity in terms of the composition of communities. It wasn't just, wealthy suburban communities. It was also communities that were less affluent, a little more rural as well. And through that experience, we started to get a better picture for what some of the commonality was in terms of use cases across those communities. The second question that you had asked, could you repeat the second part of the question?
It was about how people don't act.
Oh, people don't act in their,
yeah,
that's right. Yes. So I would say 2 things about that. Number one, that's broadly indicative of the way that people use online platforms. whether they're using their real identity or whether they're using a pseudonym. You see that across all kinds of internet forums. And so we're no different than that from a secular trend standpoint. But I think there's something about NextDoor that we tried to implement early in the product, but we need to do more. Number one was making sure that people used real names linked to real identities. So we verify that everyone who joins NextDoor is a real person who lives at a physically, at a real address that is in the neighborhood that you purport to live in. And that was intended to create some accountability for your actions on NextDoor. But I think what we found is that that in and of itself is not enough. And so then you have to get into a situation where there have to be consequences for being disruptive on the platform, consequences for not adhering to the community guidelines, to the stated norms of the platform around kindness. And that's where things like moderation systems have to be employed. People do have a lot of contentious conversations on online platforms, including ours. And we recognize that we have a responsibility to make sure that our members are feeling safe and welcome. But we also want to make sure that we create safe spaces for opt-in conversations where the heat can get a little bit higher, right? Where people are opting in to having a more vociferous debate about something to which maybe there isn't as clear and right a position to take. And they opt into that experience. And so that's where we're starting to shift some of our attention, is to say, hey, look, there are conditions in which you have to be punitive. You have to remove people from the platform. You have to take down content from the platform. That's largely the role of moderators in our own neighborhood operations team that keeps a pulse to that kind of activity and enforces those community guidelines. And those punitive actions, I think, will always be part of the platform, as they are on other platforms like Reddit, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, you name it. But again, I think there is an opportunity for us to norm different types of behaviors and to also create new places on the website or on the apps, including things like groups where people can have more heated conversations, but it doesn't pull in everybody in the neighborhood, all 1,000 members of your community or 10,000 members of the nearby neighborhoods. But it's a smaller group that's agreed to the rules of engagement, have agreed to disagree, but want to continue to have those battles online. But under no circumstances do we allow or support hateful speech, racist speech, discriminatory speech. Those have consequences per our community guidelines, and we will remove people from the platform who repeatedly engage in that kind of activity, and we'll take down content that that doesn't adhere to our guidelines.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amrita.
That's great. I am hoping we have time for 3 more questions, and I wanted to share the results and let you know what opportunity there is among this group. It looks like right now about 25% are using NextDoor, and hopefully we can kind of increase that. Wish, are you ready to ask your question?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Victoria. And thank you so much to Sumaya and Prakash for giving the talk today. It's nice to hear about your story and what you have done, especially in Fanbase and NextDoor. My question is, if you were to restart your college career again today at UC Berkeley, what would you want to change or not change? Would you follow a more structured plan to get your degree, or continue to take so-called crazy courses and not have a plan of what to do? And moreover, what is your best suggestion you can give to students who are currently studying at UC Berkeley? Thank you very much.
Prakash,
It's a great question. Thank you, Wish.
Are your parents listening?
I don't know if my parents are listening, but we've reconciled our differences on this issue of me dropping out over time. But here's what I would say. There are 2 things that I would certainly change about my approach to being a student at Cal. Number one is using the wealth of resources available as a student that are available at Cal, including things like advisors and counseling and student-led tutoring sessions, and all of this rich tapestry of community that exists at Cal. I felt like when I was there, I was kind of on my own, and I was I was in a raft on a river, and I was steering, but I wasn't really steering that hard, and so wherever the river took me, I kind of ended up. But taking a more intentional approach to, what am I doing here? Like, what do I want to learn about myself? What are my natural instincts towards the things that I think I could make a career out of, or that I find intellectually stimulating? And then how do I align myself to the resources and guidance and mentorship of those who can help me on that intentional path? And I wish I had that, right? I wish I had known, or I wish I had been more open-minded to taking advantage of all of those opportunities and resources that exist. So that's number one for sure. But when it comes to the second, of thinking beyond just the functional opportunity of building a set of skills and knowledge towards my career, and taking those so-called crazy courses and spending time socially with people and doing all of those things that rounded me out as a human being, I wouldn't change a thing. I would still take all those classes. I would take every one of them, even if it meant that I had to stay at school longer, even if it meant that my parents had to pay an extra couple of semesters. And I know not everybody has that opportunity, but if the choice was, just take CS classes, get out in 4 years and get your first job, that to me would be a hurried approach to my growth and development as a human being. And so I wouldn't shortcut that process at all. If I needed to, I would take a job. I had a job as an intramural referee. It didn't pay very well, and it didn't really actually do much to bolster my financial situation. But, I would even think about taking a job and extending my life at Cal if it meant that I would have a more well-rounded experience in terms of the coursework and time that I could spend there. So I would do everything to take advantage of the resources that were available, round out at my experience beyond just the functional opportunity to get to the next level in my career, but to really take advantage of all of those resources. There's nothing I could do, for example, to substitute for the experience that I had in Dr. Harry Edwards' Sociology of Sport class, because today I'm a founding donor to the Institute of the Study of Sport and Sociology that he has founded at San Jose State University, that's doing really important research around things like Colin Kaepernick's movement in the NFL and racial equity and gender equity in sports between the WNBA and NBA, or the US women's soccer team. These are issues that I care about deeply, that I now have the opportunity to influence as an adult, as someone who has benefited from having a successful career, in a way that I can impact the world. And I wouldn't have had that if I hadn't been in Dr. Edwards' sociology class, when I was 18 years old. So no way I would change any of that stuff.
Thank you so much for that question. We have about 3 more questions, and Prakash, just so you'll know, I'll post a quiz code for students to give feedback, and we give that feedback further to you tomorrow.
Sure.
So you'll see that as that happens. But Kiana, I'm going to ask you to come on, and as you're coming on, Prakash, maybe an easier question. Since students have this opportunity to listen to you and they're excited, what should they do if they want to get involved and work at NextDoor?
Hit me up. I'm just Prakash at nextdoor.com. We are hiring. We're a fast growing company. And similar to my own formative experience of joining a company when it was 100 people and seeing it go to 2,000, or joining Google at 1,000 and seeing it go to 10,000, those opportunities are really, really fun, because you come in, you learn on the job, right? So it's like being at a university environment, but you actually get paid. You get to build community and a network. And if you're purpose and mission driven, you get to do work that you get to put your pillow to the head at night and feel good about every night. And so I feel like we've built an environment that helps people, especially younger people, in their learning and development. We have a great community of experienced folks that are leaders in the company that you can learn from. And then there's a company that's growing fast, where it's like being on a rocket ship, and every day you're going to be asked to do something that you have no idea how to do. And that's where real growth and learning comes from, is being uncomfortable and being pushed into places and spaces where, you don't necessarily know how to do a good job, and you learn on the job. So anyway, yeah, just hit me up at Prakash at nextdoor.com. I'm happy to put you through to the recruiting team. We have internship opportunities in the fall and spring, in the summer, maybe even in the spring, fall, and summer, maybe. And then we're always hiring new grads at NextDoor as well.
Great. Hi, thank you so much for being here. I think this has actually been my favorite talk of the semester, just because we are talking about really important issues that often we don't talk about. And it's like, how do we make money? But I think it's really important to have these conversations. And that's actually what my question is about. I think our engineering system, and just like how we raise engineers, doesn't allow for us to understand the intersections of social justice and even environmental justice to our technical work, and how the technology and engineering that we produce can have really adverse impacts on different communities and different people. So I wanted to ask, I know, it's really great that you're doing this work, and it seems like it came from your time at Cal and also your upbringing in Hayward, but that's not really the group of people that tend to go into engineering. It's a very privileged community. So how can we make sure that we are bringing new engineers into the world that understand the importance of their work and the intersections of their work with these really important issues, maybe in our education system, but also in our workplaces and just the infrastructure and society that we've built?
Yeah, there's a old saying that you can't be what you've never seen. And for me, that was certainly true. Growing up in Hayward, I didn't know what a software engineer was. And when I kind of figured out what a software engineer was at Cal, and I didn't like what I thought it was, right? I thought it was, a bunch of geeky dudes. Sorry for any of the other geeks. I'm a geek myself, but for any of the other geeks in the audience, I thought it was a bunch of geeky dudes with pocket protectors working in a dungeon and just banging out code all day. And I think we need to change the perception of the industry. We need to be more welcoming in our perception of the industry. There's a lot of research that shows that there was almost equal participation between men and women in computer science for some time, up until the 1980s, when a lot of our marketing and the way that we portrayed that industry started to shift in a way that became increasingly more male. And so, males started to play video games and get involved in home computing much earlier than females did, because it wasn't something that was seen as an attractive opportunity for females. And we started to see this imbalance in our computer science programs early on. And if you look at schools like my own in the Hayward public school system, we just weren't very well funded. We didn't have great computer labs. We didn't have great programs. And so there wasn't any early education around technology. So I feel like as an industry that has been incredibly prosperous, that has proliferated this huge volume of potential mentors, teachers, advisors, experts in the field, we need to all link arms as an industry. Today, we're in an economy of local optimization. And by that, I mean every single company in Silicon Valley is struggling with the same issues around diversity, inclusion, equity, belonging. It's about the composition of their companies, and it's about their impact in the real world of the products and services they build. And we're all trying to go it alone and solve it ourselves. We're trading in the same talent pool. We're not expanding the talent pool. And so I think we need to link arms as an industry and start to think about ways to divert our resources, and that's human capital and real capital, investment capital, into programs that actually increase equity in a systemic way. And so there are a lot of great programs that I'm involved with here in the Bay Area, because that's my opportunity to have access and impact, including things like the Hidden Genius program. The Hidden Genius program is really about teaching entrepreneurship at a very early stage. There's another excellent program called Ting, which is run by Cal alumni Anwar McQueen, who used to play for the basketball team, which opens up pathways for people who are involved in sports and have a passion for sports, but pair that with technological education to say, it's not the only way you can get involved in sports to be an athlete, but you can actually be a video editor, or you can be someone who works on these technological aspects of sports. And so there's a bunch of passion projects that I have around this. But again, it's a local optimization. There's only so much that one human being can do. And I love the work. I love doing it. I would do it all day if I could. But how can we get 10 people from every company of our size and 1,000 people from every Google size company or Facebook size company to invest that same level of human capital and resource in helping to shape what early education looks like and opening up more opportunities? And even just showing up at schools in OUSD or Hayward Unified or Berkeley Unified and showing people no, I'm a software engineer. And yeah, I'm a geek, but I'm not that geeky. I'm actually not a terrible human being, and I have fun, and it's fun to work at companies like this. We're not all wearing pocket protectors and working in a dungeon. And there's lots of cool stuff that you can do. So that's where I've focused a lot of my attention is let's help young people from all walks of life, all socioeconomic backgrounds, all types of lived experience, see the possibilities in their career. Let's help give them the resources and tools and training to open up a pathway to learn more and to build the skills that they need. And I actually think in the next 10 to 20 years, we're going to see a dramatic shift away from the traditional kind of 4-year university education to something that looks a lot more like vocational training. When I was growing up, you know, I'm a kid of the 70s and 80s. There were these ROTC programs, and they were really popular in the Hayward School District. I don't know if other people saw these, but like they would teach you how to weld, or they would teach you how to be a carpenter. And it was vocational training. Like you learn how to weld and then you leave school and you become a welder. You never go to college, and that's okay. You can make a great career as a welder. Well, now there are things like coding boot camps where they're largely places for transition, or people who have some professional experience in some area are trying to make a transition into tech. And so they go to a, you know, multi-week or multi-month coding boot camp. But like, what if we took that boot camp model and really made it ubiquitous and made access to it a little easier, brought the costs down? You know, a 4-year university education is inaccessible to so many people. But like a boot camp education sponsored by your employer of choice, so maybe Google sponsors you and then hires you at the end of that, sounds like a pretty good idea to me. So I think there's lots of things that we can do systemically to link arms as an industry, start to invest in early pipelines of education, help people realize their dreams and see themselves in an industry that has historically marginalized and excluded them. So that's kind of where my attention is.
Thank you so much for your answer. And yeah, again, thanks for talking about these issues today. I really appreciate it.
You bet, Kiana. Thank you. That was a great question.
Gosh, we've come to the bottom of our, and a little past, hour and a half. Thank you so much. I know we still have some questions, but I want to be conscious of your time, your time and your family, to be quite honest.
Of course.
Have questions, I'm assuming it's okay with you if they send them to you at prakash@nextdoor.com.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And would love to hear from all of you. Thank you for the time. This is such a great forum. It's such an honor to be part of this forum. I know there have been some really distinguished guests over the years since this started back in, I think it was 2005, right? It's been a long time now. But I'm just so happy to see the interest in entrepreneurship from our young folks, from folks who, you know, are going to build the next set of companies. And I can't wait for the next set of Cal-founded companies to be in the spotlight. So thank you all for the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Wishing you and NextDoor all the best of success, because I think it'll help us all have a better world.
Thank you so much.
Good night, everyone. We'll see you next week for our last meetup. We'll talk to some people from future forums, so it'll kind of continue. Prakash, thank you. Sumaya,
thank you
very much. And students, as always, you're the best. Thank you.